I say, here's fun. If time travel was a thing and you had the chance to visit any particular moments in railway history, what would they be and why? Seeing as people have been discussing their dream gala weekends, rail tours, new builds or railway reopenings on social media during lockdown, I thought it would be a fun idea to share some of our dream railway experiences, the sort of things that we wished we could have experienced but were simply born too late for it. For the sake of this exercise, you can make 8 trips to the past. 1 ride on a standard gauge line on a normal working day, 1 ride on a narrow gauge line on a normal working day, 1 ride on a miniature or broad gauge line on a normal working day, 1 railway or station closure, 1 railway or station opening, 1 prestige express working, 1 famous event, such as a speed record or a cavalcade or parade or trials or even a disaster if you were that way inclined, and 1 place where you could just sit back and watch the action. It could be a terminus, a country halt, marshalling yard, workshop, harbour railway system, colliery or industrial site complex, etc. The only rules are that you can't use it to exercise any Back to the Future style time-changing logic so you can alter the present, although getting rid of the source of that horrible disgusting virus would help. You have to declare which period in history your chosen visits take place, and most importantly, you have to explain why you chose it. It can be personal to you, or it can be of national or international importance, or historical importance, blah 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 wizza wizza wizza. I'll kick things off and we can all see how this works. My ordinary standard gauge railway journey of choice would be London King's Cross to Edinburgh Waverley in 1936. Being mostly flat, the East Coast Main Line isn't quite as scenic compared to the West Coast or Midland Main Lines, but the chance to travel out of King's Cross in a teak set with N2s and Ivord Atlantics alongside the numerous Gresdy Pacifics would be interesting. The London and North Eastern Railway is probably the most underrepresented of the big 4 in preservation, so to spend a day maybe stopping off at places like Doncaster, York, Darlington and Newcastle to see the wide selection of ex-Great Northern, Great Eastern and North Eastern motive power alongside the new machines of the 20s and 30s would make for a long and interesting day out, one which highlights just how the LNER couldn't afford to scrap and build locomotives like the LMS and Great Western could by that time. My ordinary narrow gauge railway journey of choice would be the entire Isle of Man railway system in about 1927-28. You may consider this a bit of a cheat, but timetables usually listed runs from Ramsey in the north to change at St John's for Peel, and then run down to Douglas, after which it would be easy to change for Port Erin. It would also be possible to squeeze in a run to Foxdale in the same day. Why the late 1920s? Because the system was still receiving enough investment for the permanent way to be up to a reasonable standard compared to the 70s and 80s. Furthermore, the locomotive fleet had been boosted with the introduction of Manning, the biggest of the Manx 240 tanks, and most importantly, the railway system had adopted the use of continuous brakes by this point. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't feel safe running more than 60 tons of train up to 45 miles an hour just with mechanical brakes at the front and the back. My miniature or broad gauge railway ride of choice would be Brunel's broad gauge Great Western system circa late 1840s. There's so much hype about the use of broad gauge on the GWR, but there's nobody left alive who can say what it was really like outside the odd demonstration line. It's been said that Brunel calculated this gauge specifically for a number of reasons, including a lower centre of gravity, better aerodynamics, less friction, more stability, and more speed. So it'll be nice to see if the great man fulfilled his dream of providing a service that would get you from London to Bristol in 4 hours without spilling your coffee. Why the late 1840s? By this time, Daniel Gooch's motive power had become well established, and a connection with America via Brunel's SS Great Britain was now fully possible. Now, they may not have had continuous brakes by then, but it seemed impossible to roll a broad gauge engine, so swings and roundabouts. My railway or station closure of choice would be the Linton and Barnstable Railway on September the 29th, 1935. The L&B was loved by millions, but seemed appreciated by the minority when it was actually running. It was quirky and charming, for sure, but it was neither quick enough nor profitable enough for the Southern Railway to justify running it beyond the economic stress of the 30s in wake of their modern forward-thinking image. The railway boasted some impressive earthworks and permanent way for a cross-country narrow gauge line and a legendary fleet of locomotives, but no doubt this added to the overhead costs of running it. While I agree that encouraging people to visit this line on a normal working day might have deterred the Southern's decision to close the line, unless Christopher Lloyd's theory about time travel actually holds water, you can't really change the past. So visiting this line for one last hurrah would at least help cement people's fondness for the line. My railway or station opening of choice would be the Tallaghtlin Railway on May the 14th, 1951. Nobody really knew this at the time, but this change in the railway's operation would prove to be instrumental in railway history. The Talyllyn faced closure at the end of the 1950 season, as it was down to one working engine, no slate traffic, and the line's owner, Henry Hayden Jones, had passed away. But by this time, LTC Rolt had founded the Talyllyn Railway Preservation Society and convinced Lady Hayden Jones that with volunteer labour the railway could remain open. The event might look a bit rustic judging from the archive clips, but being there, having travelled back from a period when the railway had become a major commercial success, and having grown up during the subsequent heritage movement that spawned from this event, seeing the cutting of the ribbon would be a bucket list moment to see how far things have come. My Prestige Express ride would be on the Orient Express from Paris to Constantinople circa 1909. Surely every rail fan would want to have at least one long-distance transcontinental journey under their belt at some point. And for me, it would likely be on this one at around this time. The Trans-Siberian and Trans-American journeys both sound amazing, but neither was set up for a very comfortable experience. And even those who travelled on them back in the early days were often found to be misled by the railway companies upon arrival at their destination. La Compagnie Internationale de Wagon Lits was set up in 1876 to specifically provide first-class sleeping cars and dining cars for long-distance journeys in Europe, similar to those that George Pullman had set up in the USA. In 1909, the Orient Express service featured new rolling stock with more comfortable suspension and furnishings, so what better a way to spend 67.5 hours on board an overnight service than to go in this kind of style? At least it was still a few years before a group of Serbian rebels triggered a war, although it's for the best that anybody who travels on this train avoids the usual gang of murderers. My famous event of choice would be Mallard's record run on July the 3rd, 1938. If not to see the locomotive actually achieve 126 miles an hour, but to witness an A4 above the ton in pre-war colours with pre-war coaching stock. Mallard was the first steam locomotive I can remember seeing as a babe in arms, so it would be lovely to see her doing what she was famed for. And my place where I could just sit back and watch the action would be Evercreech Junction on the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway in 1959. The S&D has warmed the hearts of millions down the years. It was impractical, necessitated double heading or banking in many places, and it didn't really make much by way of a lucrative living. But it boasted an impressive array of motive power, and Evercreech Junction was the hub for goods traffic from the north and passenger trains from 3 directions. Why 1959? Because the railway had just changed hands from Midland and Southern joint control. So while there was still change on the way from the prejudiced Western region, it was still in the early stages of transition. There was still a relatively interesting selection of Midland motive power knocking around amongst the standards and bullies that were traversing the area by then. Furthermore, the legendary railway photographer Ivo Peters began studying the S&D the previous year, so who knows, I might get a chance to bump into him and talk about all things railways over a drink. So yeah, that's my 8 steps of choice into the past. If time travel were possible and perfectly harmless, where would you go? How would you choose from each category? What year in history would you witness your choice? And why? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, with or without the usual tipple in hand. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.